So, I posted the Trump Unacceptance and Resistance Disorder Challenge, which basically asked a loony leftist to name one Sniffy Joe accomplishment for 50 years in politics. They posted, of all things, a meme. At which point, I did exactly what I asked the loony leftist to do. I Googled. Here's what I found. Economy added 678,000 jobs in February as Omicron faded, dining, travel picked up, unemployment fell to 3.8%. Paul Davidson. USA Today. Employers added a roaring 678,000 jobs in February, the most since last summer, as COVID-19's Omicron variant faded, spurring idled employees to return to work and reviving dining, travel, and other activities. He didn't create a single job. People going back to 88,000. USA Today. Employers added a roaring 678,000 jobs in February, the most since last summer, as COVID-19's Omicron variant faded, spurring idled employees to return to work and reviving dining, travel, and other activities. Didn't create a single job. People going back to work. So, I posted the Trump Unacceptance and Resistance Disorder Challenge, which basically asked a loony leftist to name one Sniffy Joe accomplishment for 50 years in politics. They posted, of all things, a meme. At which point, I did exactly what I asked the loony leftist to do. I Googled. Here's what I found. Economy added 678,000 jobs in February as Omicron faded, dining, travel picked up, unemployment fell to 3.8%. Paul Davidson. USA Today. Employers added a roaring 678,000 jobs in February, the most since last summer, as COVID-19's Omicron variant faded, spurring idled employees to So, I posted the Trump Unacceptance and Resistance Disorder Challenge, which basically asked a loony leftist to name one Sniffy Joe accomplishment for 50 years in politics. They posted, of all things, a meme. At which point, I did exactly what I asked the loony leftist to do. I Googled. Here's what I found. Economy added 678,000 jobs in February as Omicron faded, dining, travel picked up, unemployment fell to 3.8%. Paul Davidson. USA Today. Employers added a roaring 678,000 jobs in February, the most since last summer, as COVID-19's Omicron variant faded, spurring idled employees to return to work and reviving dining, travel, and other activities. He didn't create a single job. People going back to work is not creating jobs, it's ending totalitarianism. The unemployment rate fell from 4% to 3.8%, the Labor Department said Friday. Economists surveyed by Bloomberg had estimated that 400,000 jobs were added last month. The 678,000 gains mark the strongest showing since July. So far, the nation has recovered 19.9 million, or 90%, of the 22 million jobs lost early in the pandemic, leaving it 2.1 million jobs shy of its pre-crisis level, a gap that could be closed by summer. President Joe Biden, under criticism from Republicans for soaring inflation, said the report shows his policies are working to get Americans back to work. Back to jobs they already had, where they're making less money, due to record high inflation. This progress is the result of the new economic approach I talked about in the State of the Union, grow the economy from the bottom up and middle out. And it's a result of our success combating COVID-19 and moving forward safely, Biden said in a statement issued by the White House. Combat COVID-19? Sniffy Joe has more deaths than Trump, all while having a vaccine and worthless mask mandates. The drop in unemployment came even as the number of people working or looking for jobs grew by 304,000, pushing the labor force participation rate from 62.2% to 62.3%, highest since March 2020. That means more people caring for children and others on the sidelines are returning to a favorable labor market with rising wages. And higher inflation, so no higher wages. Boy, facts can be a bitch. There's no question people are coming back to work, Labor Secretary Marty Walsh said in an interview. COVID and the Omicron variant are going down, vaccinations are going up. People are getting a lot more comfortable. Also encouraging, payroll additions for December and January were revised up by a total of 92,000. January's surprisingly robust advances, which came despite massive Omicron-related worker absences, were even stronger than believed, at 481,000. Omicron absences, try free money absences, which has pushed record inflation. All signs are that the pandemic is easing its hold on the jobs economy, says Jane Oates, president of Working Nation, a nonprofit that raises awareness about the challenges facing U.S. workers and former head of Labor's Employment and Training Division. Yet Labor's survey was conducted before Russia's invasion of Ukraine drove up energy prices and rocked markets, developments that economists say could crimp business confidence and hiring in coming months. Gas prices have soared above $5 a gallon in Southern California, a state with the highest gas prices in the country, and the rest of the country may soon follow, according to a fuel analyst. In February, leisure and hospitality, which includes restaurants and bars, led the broad-based job gains with 179,000 as dining and travel bounced back. Professional and business services added 95,000, healthcare, after record numbers were forced to quit due to an experimental vaccine. 64,000, construction, 60,000, transportation and warehousing, 48,000, retail, 37,000, and manufacturing, 36,000. About 760,000 people missed work in January because of COVID, Goldman Sachs estimates. Many salaried workers out sick are still counted as employed because they receive paid sick leave benefits, but sideline hourly staffers generally aren't tallied. All told, Goldman estimates that about 200,000 people returned to job sites and payrolls last month. They continue to use the word returned, because Sniffy Joe didn't create a single job. People are just going back to jobs they've had all along. Meanwhile, COVID cases have fallen more than 90% since peaking. Not possible, you all had your masks on, right? In mid-January as Omicron eased, according to Oxford Economics. That has led to a pickup in dining, travel and hotel occupancy, along with beefed-up hiring in those sectors, says Diane Swank, chief economist of Grant Thornton. The number of businesses open, employees working and hours worked all increased sharply in February, according to Homebase, which supplies payroll software to small businesses. The nation is still grappling with severe labor shortages that have crimped hiring despite record job openings. But the rising share of Americans working or looking for jobs indicate the crunch may be easing somewhat. That might reflect delayed effects from school reopenings and the expiration of enhanced jobless benefits in September, says Ian Shepherdson, chief economist of Pantheon Macroeconomics. The developments likely resolved childcare problems for some parents and prodded some unemployed people to look harder for new jobs, he says. The larger supply of workers appears to be moderating wage growth, says economist Michael Pierce of Capital Economics. Average hourly earnings were virtually flat last month, lowering the annual increase to a still hefty 5.1% from 5.7% in January. Too bad inflation is at almost 8%. The blockbuster job gains almost certainly cement the Federal Reserve's decision to raise interest rates this month for the first time in more than 3 years, Pierce says. Fed Chair Jerome Powell told Congress this week a quarter-point increase in the central bank's near-zero short-term rate is likely as the central bank moves to curtail inflation that has hit a 40-year high of 7.5%. But the slightly tempered pay increases reduce the need for more aggressive moves in coming months, Pierce says, such as a half-point hike at some meetings. Biden wants you to believe he's creating jobs, despite what your own eyes tell you. By Post editorial board. President Joe Biden loves to take credit where it isn't due on the economy. Americans are back to work, he said Friday of the latest jobs report, citing record job creation and record wage gains. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nominal wage gains since Biden took office have been wiped out by sky-high inflation, now around 8%. All jobs now come with a built-in pay cut that's only going to get worse unless the president changes course. Worse, employment will crater if he gets the tax hikes he proposes. And he and his administration have not created a single job. In February of 2020, the nation had around 152.5 million total non-farm employees, the highest number ever. Then came the pandemic, which chopped that number down to near 130.5 million. We've since been creeping back up to where we were before, and creeping more slowly as Biden's policies took effect. And we're still not there yet. The latest count is 150.9 million total non-farm employees. Republican states have led in job creation as Democrat states like New York lag behind on keeping outdated COVID mandates. So we're still significantly short of that 152.5 million peak, which means there's been no job creation, only an anemic recovery. State-level data? Also ugly. The vast majority of U.S. states haven't recovered their pandemic job losses. New York is missing 454,000 jobs, with New York City missing 283,000. California has a deficit of around 677,000. Both states have unemployment rates well above the national rate. Under President Donald Trump, the economy actually did add jobs pre-pandemic. Close to 9 million, in fact, from January 2016 to January 2020. And the median household saw historic wage gains. The 7% annual increase in 2019 was the biggest on record. President Joe Biden claims Americans are back to work. Christopher Sadowski. Even if we're using the idiotic Biden standard for jobs created, i.e., COVID-killed jobs returning as the pandemic fades, Trump created almost 12 million between April 2020 and December 2020. Biden's much-touted creation of 7.9 million is much less, over much more time. Our economy, Biden blustered on Friday, is no longer on the mend, it's on the move. Pure hot air. The numbers don't lie. Our jobs picture is improving too slowly and workers are seeing their gains erode daily, with gas, groceries, rent and everything else going through the roof. Former President Donald Trump's sound fiscal policies created approximately 9 million during his presidency. Grim reality may not stop Biden from patting himself on the back for his fake achievements, but his collapsing poll numbers show Americans believe their own eyes, not his bull. U.S. economy not as strong as it appears. Chuck Jones, senior contributor. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis released its third estimate for December quarter's GDP growth, coming in at 6.9%. This was an increase from 2.3% in the September quarter, but when the large impact from inventories are excluded, the growth rate falls to 1.6% for the last quarter of the year. GDP growth estimates can be distorted in various ways. One of them is that the full-year growth rate is calculated using the change in GDP from the previous quarter to the current one and multiplying by 4 to get a full-year result. This means any particular increase or decrease that is out of the norm is multiplied by 4, even though the item that caused the swing is not sustainable or will be reversed in subsequent quarters. Probably the two best examples of this were the second and third quarters of 2020 due to the pandemic. While most quarters' GDP results are in the low single digits, the second quarter saw a 31.2% drop in GDP versus the reality of about an 8% fall from the previous quarter, and the third quarter came in with a 33.8% increase, or just over 8% growth quarter to quarter. Inventory build distorted last quarter's GDP growth rate. The latest example is the final estimate for December 2021 quarter's GDP result. Companies build up or decrease inventory in any given quarter. If the changes are big enough, even though they will be subsequently reversed in the next quarter or two, this change can have a significant impact to the GDP calculation. The same can also be attributed to trade, but usually to a smaller scale than inventory. Inventory swings largely cancel themselves out in the long run, but it can take a few quarters to balance out. Prior to 2021, when inventory changes negatively impacted GDP growth by 1.4% or 140 basis points for the year, since 2009 inventory's yearly impact has been in a range of a negative 0.77% or 77 basis points in 2015 to a positive 1.13% or 113 basis points in 2009. Over the course of 13 years, inventories have negatively impacted GDP growth in 10 of the years and only positively impacted the calculation in 3 years. The numbers below show the reported growth rate for each of 2021's 4 quarters and what they were when removing the impacts from inventory and trade. When inventory is removed, the first half of the year shows the economy was stronger than reported and weaker in the second half. Without inventory impact. First quarter 2021 reported 6.3%. Without, 8.9%. Second quarter 2021 reported 6.7%. Without, 8%. Third quarter 2021 reported 2.3%. Without, 0.1%. Fourth quarter 2021 reported 6.9%. Without, 1.6%. Technicals point to more stock market carnage ahead. For trade, it turns out that it was a drag on the reported numbers in each of the 4 quarters. This is shown in the without numbers below, all being higher than the ex-inventory results from above. Without inventory and trade impact. First quarter 2021 reported 6.3%. Without, 10.5%. Second quarter 2021 reported 6.7%. Without, 8.2%. Third quarter 2021 reported 2.3%. Without, 1.4%. Fourth quarter 2021 reported 6.9%. Without, 1.8%. Atlanta Fed model has March quarter's GDP growth at 1.3%. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta publishes data and a graph that estimates the GDP growth rate for the current quarter. The GDP Now model is showing the March quarter to have 1.3% growth compared to the blue chip consensus range of 0.8% to 2.8%. Keep in mind that the blue chip estimates shown in the graph are almost a month old. There is a delay between the numbers in the graph and their current forecasts. This compares to 2021's GDP growth rate of 5.7% and 5.3% without inventory's impact. Also, the Atlanta Fed's GDP Now projection is based on a formula from previous quarters, and the impact of COVID-19 could have a material influence on the estimate. GDP Now GDP forecast of 1.3%. GDP Now GDP forecast of 1.3%. Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, blue chip economic indicators and blue chip financial forecasts. Jefferies economists still constructive on growth. On a weekly basis, Annetta Markoska, Jefferies chief economist, and Thomas Simons, Jefferies money market economist, publish a report titled Tracking the Reopening of the U.S. Economy with Real-Time Data. It is a compilation of various economic indicators showing how the economy is performing long before many official U.S. government reports are generated. The Jefferies U.S. Economic Activity Index finished last week at 100.4, roughly 2 points above its level a month ago, and nearly 6 points above its January 15 trough. However, it is down over 10 points from its high in late 2021. Markoska and Simons wrote in their latest report that our real-time activity index has held up well in recent weeks. Nearly all sectors posted modest improvements, with the notable exception of housing. This is the most rate-sensitive sector of the economy, and judging from mortgage purchase applications, the recent increases in mortgage rates are already weighing heavily on housing demand. However, that is not true for other sectors of the economy. Most notably, consumer activity remains very resilient and has not shown any cracks to date. On the contrary, most real-time indicators of consumer spending point to incremental upside in March, both in goods and services. They added, there are many reasons to worry about the economic outlook: runaway inflation exacerbated by the Ukraine invasion and China COVID outbreaks, sharp increases in interest rates, and a yield curve which is about to invert. Yet, despite these headwinds, we have remained very constructive on growth, arguing that household finances are strong enough to shield consumption, including at the low end, from these shocks. So far, so good. Inflation drives wages down, not up. The Labor Department released a report Friday showing that worker pay increased about 4% in 1 year, the fastest rate in 2 decades. This led to predictable alarm that the U.S. is facing a wage price spiral, in which higher wages push up prices, which lead to demands for still higher wages, and so forth. But the wage price spiral is a false and antiquated economic idea that refuses to die and keeps generating bad policies. Wages don't spiral up during inflation, they spiral down as higher prices eat away paychecks. The dollar amounts on paychecks will rise, but not fast enough for their real value to outpace inflation. The recent stories of wage increases came not long after the government announced prices increased 7% in the past year. A more accurate headline for coverage of Labor's report last Friday would have been real wages drop 3%. The reason real wages are dropping is simple. Wages are what economists call sticky, meaning they don't change as fast as other prices do. When inflation comes along, gasoline stations can switch their price signs in an hour and restaurants can adjust their menus in a day, but most employees get a salary bump only once a year. Some unions renegotiate their salaries only every 5 years. The combination of flexible prices and sticky wages also explains why inflation provides a temporary boost for business. John Maynard Keynes observed that inflation tends to increase profits because it creates a greater spread between the prices businesses charged and the wages they paid. As one International Monetary Fund report stated, during an inflation there is a redistribution of income away from labor to capital. This explains recent surging business profits. We also saw this story play out in the 1970s, when the idea of the wage price spiral first attracted attention. At the time, many Keynesian economists wanted to blame inflation on anything but the Federal Reserve printing too much money. So they came up with the wage price spiral, also known as cost-push inflation, which they thought was driving up prices. But they confused nominal and real wages. Even though paychecks were for more dollars, their actual value dropped by almost 20% over the decade as real profits increased. As Fed chairman from 1970 to 1978, Arthur Burns didn't want to take responsibility for inflation either. He blamed greedy workers and businesses and thus convinced President Richard Nixon to impose wage and price controls in 1971. This led to shortages throughout the economy and did nothing to stanch inflation. It was only after the Fed embraced the ideas of Burns's former student Milton Friedman and began controlling the money supply that inflation went down. This false idea of wage price spirals can have devastating effects in downturns too. When prices were dropping and the economy failing in the Great Depression, some economists argued that low wages were holding back consumption. They demanded that the government mandate wage increases to help push up purchasing and prices, thinking this would push up wages even further. Although not named as such, they wanted to start a wage price spiral upward. At that time too, economists were confusing dollar wages with real wages.
Economic research has shown that since prices fell in the first 3 years of the Great Depression, sticky wages meant the real pay of workers went up almost 11%.
These high wages pinched business profits, prevented hiring, and drove unemployment to almost 25%. Even after the economy started to improve, however, President Franklin D. Roosevelt took the advice of those economists concerned about low wages and signed legislation to increase them through forced unionization and cartels in June 1933.
This spurred more unemployment and hindered the recovery.
Both then and today, activists refuse to recognize the trade-offs between temporarily boosting the economy and driving up real wages. For instance, the fed-up campaign lobbies for more money printing and claims to be fighting for full employment, rising wages, and a Federal Reserve that works for working people. Yet the way the Fed creates a temporary boom is by allowing workers' wages to drop and for businesses to hire more people on the cheap. Conversely, if the Fed wanted to increase real wages, they would create a deflation and then sticky wages would drive up unemployment. The only way to have a prosperous economy for workers is to keep monetary policy stable, which means keeping the amount of money the government prints in line with the economy's needs. Only the Fed can do that. If we start to blame inflation on other issues, like greedy workers or monopolizing businesses, we're going to chase every solution except the real one. When workers cash their depreciated paycheck next Friday, it won't be their fault that they're falling behind. It'll be the Fed's. Biden touts $1.5 trillion budget deficit reduction, but he's not telling the whole story.
Key points.
President Joe Biden touted sizable reductions in the federal deficit in the current fiscal year as part of his administration's economic savvy. While the Treasury Department estimates that this year's budget deficit will decline by $1.5 trillion, the reason for the smaller deficit is a matter of debate. Under former President Donald Trump, the U.S. poured trillions into the economy to support small businesses and help households cope with COVID-19.
Many of those programs are now ending.
We're on track to cut the federal deficit by another $1.5 trillion by end of current fiscal year, says President Biden. President Joe Biden on Wednesday tried to cast his administration as spending hawks, touting sizable reductions in the federal deficit this fiscal year as a key departure from what he characterized as rampant spending by his Republican predecessor. While the Treasury Department estimates that this year's budget deficit will decline by $1.5 trillion, the reason for the smaller deficit is a matter of debate. Under former President Donald Trump, the U.S. poured trillions into the economy to lessen the impact of COVID-19 lockdowns at the height of the pandemic and to develop and manufacture vaccines, masks and other gear needed to protect healthcare workers and others from the virus. As those pandemic-era programs end, the federal government will spend less, even as the Biden administration works with Senator Mitt Romney, Republican Utah, on legislation providing another $10 billion in COVID relief. The president's more modest budget proposal doesn't include a majority of the cost of Biden's massive Build Back Better agenda, a transportation and technology infrastructure program that Democrats haven't been able to pass. The administration priced the plan at $1.75 trillion, but it phased out some of the programs that would likely be permanent to reduce the price tag on paper.
The Congressional Budget Office estimated its costs at around $4.73 trillion if the programs were permanent.
The plan also would have included significant tax increases on high-income households to help pay for the programs. We're on track to cut the federal deficit by another $1.5 trillion by the end of this fiscal year, the biggest decline in a single year in American history, Biden said from the White House. The president has recast his economic strategy in recent months to focus on deficit reduction and stricter spending controls as dozens of his fellow Democrats face close midterm elections that will decide the composition of Congress in the final 2 years of his first term. Comments about the more frugal budget plan come as the White House looks for ways to sympathize with and assist voters frustrated by skyrocketing inflation rates not seen since the 1980s.
We reduce federal borrowing, and we help combat inflation, he added.
Bringing down the deficit is one way to ease inflationary pressures in an economy where the consequence of a war, and gas prices, and oil, and food, and it's a different world right this moment because of Ukraine and Russia. The Federal Reserve, the nation's central bank tasked to keep prices in check, is set to raise interest rates by a hefty 0.5 percentage point later Wednesday in its bid to quell annual inflation of more than 8%. Deficit reduction is a top issue for Senator Joe Manchin, a conservative Democrat from West Virginia who for much of Biden's presidency has acted as a key swing vote on major spending initiatives. But while austerity may please Manchin, it's unclear whether Democratic voters, many of whom elected Biden to pursue significant climate and infrastructure policy, will feel as rosy about a slimmer federal balance sheet.